Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you, Brother Chris Ludke.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to look at the level. One of these working tools very similar to the square, which we recently dealt with, where sometimes finding the material can be tricky because we assume knowledge. And in this case, much like any number of the working tools, I'm going to bring you a number of different interpretations, some more nuanced than others, but we'll get into that. When the level is introduced to us as a working tool, we are told that it is an instrument made use of by operative Masons to prove horizontals. And that reminds us that we are traveling upon that level of time to that undiscovered country. This is, however, not the first time you would have heard it. If you were paying attention at the close of one of the first meetings that you would have seen, we learned that Masons should meet on the level. So it's something that comes up even earlier than the fellowcraft degree. I think the symbolism of the level in these two instances hints that the level is something significant to teach us about life and death. And as always, let's start at the beginning. What is the meaning, or how do we define this tool? Now, a level, of course, is a tool. At its core, on the level, indicates that an object is the same distance from a common surface, no matter where you measure it from. And so level meaning that it is level to something. It is a relative measurement. So two things are effectively parallel, typically the ground. Now, this is critical in construction because, of course, you want your house or any other structure to be level so that the weight is carried equally across the foundation. The floors should not slope and things will not, hopefully, roll across the floor. Although if you live in an old house or ever have, you've had that experience of areas that are much lower than others, areas that are not level. Generally in construction, when something is level, it has more to do with the ground on which it stands and gravity as a whole. Again, that idea of spreading the weight, spreading the stress out among this entire foundation. In terms of the history of the level itself, historians say that the Egyptians were the first to use levels, going back as far as 1100 BC. So that would put around 3,000 years ago. More than likely, this is a scenario where they have levels earlier than that because we find level structures earlier in Turkey and elsewhere. We just don't find the level itself. And sometimes we use that as a basis to say, well, the Egyptians invented it. And that's not necessarily the case. It's just that the Egyptians happen to live in a desert, which happens to preserve things very, very well. About 1,000 years later, we see builders, so around the time of Jesus, the Roman Empire, etc. Builders are using an A-frame level on which a plumb line is suspended from that point on the A where the two side lines meet. And this works really well because you can measure out how it bisects that letter A, which is a triangle, and determine that something is in fact level as long as you're trying to level it to the ground. When the feet of the A are set on a surface to be checked, the plumb line should fall right at the point where it bisects the crossbar. So that would mean that everything's level. Then they invent water levels. Now, it is said that this is invented by the Italians in the 17th century. It may be earlier. Water levels are one of those logically obvious things that I have a hard time thinking that it's not invented until 300 years ago. But the idea is that you take a water-filled tube with two glass cylinders, one on either end. When the water level in each cylinder is even, the surface to be leveled is horizontal. You could do this in a more ancient sense with 2 cups of water that are marked. And as long as the level is equal in both and the water is not tilted, so you'd need that relative mark on the inside, it would work. And of course, today we have spirit levels. Invented in about 1661, also known as the bubble level, they initially featured a straight sealed glass tube containing water and air bubble. Later that will be refined. The water will be replaced with alcohol or other spirits to prevent freezing. And sometimes that tube today is slightly bent upward just to get rid of some of the erratic behavior of the bubble. That being said, now we know what the level is and we can agree on our terms. In common usage, we see on the level meaning something that is honest, someone who is without deception. We doubted the offer could be genuine, but it turned out to be on the level. And this comes into common parlance probably from Masonry, just like being blackballed or being on the square. In Masonic usage, of course, just about every Mason has heard the phrase on the level when they attend their local lodge meeting. It's one of the most basic ideas of Freemasonry. The level is one of the most important tools, and it's often used to symbolize fraternal equality. The meaning of the symbol has several dimensions, with the foremost being that it's a reminder that all men are equal, and we're going to be playing off of that in a second. That everyone's on a level playing field with other members, with other men in general. So let's look at these interpretations. On the level, basic Masonic meaning. The level can be a symbol of equality. The equality expressed here does not mean that of wealth, social distinction, civil office, or service to mankind. So we're not trying to make everyone equal in terms of their resources, in terms of their office. Instead, each is endowed with a worth and dignity, which is spiritual and not subject to man-made distinctions. The idea that Masonry considers the internal and not the external character of a man. Thus, the level dignifies labor. How does it do this? Well, the equity practiced in Masonry recognizes that one man may have greater potentiality in life, service, or reward than another, but believes that any man may aspire to the heights no matter how great. This is very similar to the ideas we looked at in the Enlightenment, this idea of a potential meritocracy, that a man can improve his station in life. And this is what makes the level interesting, because it dignifies labor and the man who performs it. It basically says, look, be great at what you do. And greatness can go across the board. So if you're a great doctor, it's the same as being a great bricklayer. And very interesting sort of idea when you dig into it, because it doesn't mean that these people should be paid the same. It doesn't mean anything like that. It means that we should seek greatness in whatever field we're in. So it also acknowledges the equality of manhood as being equality without regard to station. Very similar to another Enlightenment interpretation, which I'm going to take from a short talk bulletin in 1924. What then is the equality of which the level is the symbol? Clearly it's not identity or even similarity of gift and endowment. No, it is something better. It is the equal right of each man to the full use and development of such power as he has, whatever it may be, unhindered by injustice or oppression. Again, getting at that idea of the great bricklayer being equal to the great doctor. As our Declaration of Independence puts it, every man has an equal and inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, with due regard for the rights of others in the same quest. You do not have the right to become a great bricklayer if that means that you need to take other people down in the process. Or, as the famous slogan sums it up, equal rights for all, special privileges for none. That is to say, before the law, every man has an equal right to equal justice, as before God, in whose presence all men are one in their littleness. Each receives equally and impartially the blessings of eternal love, even as the sun shines and the rain falls on all with equal benediction. So the idea here, again, that Enlightenment idea of all men are created at some level with a sense of equality. We all have the potential for greatness. We all have the potential to do any number of different things, and it's up to us to use it. But we cannot regard that as a significant difference. It doesn't matter if you're a great basketball player or a great electrician. At the end of the day, greatness is greatness. To develop that potential, that is what the level is about, at least according to those two interpretations. Now, the level could also refer to death. Another important interpretation we can take from the level is connected with the idea of death. We are all equal in the eyes of death. The Roman poet Claudinus said death is the great leveler. Even anyone familiar with Shakespeare recognizes the phrase, that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, because it shows up in Hamlet, where one of its interpretations is that it's referring to death. From this, we are reminded that we are all mortal. However much we dress things up or down, it will happen. Death comes for all, the rich, the poor, everyone in between. This means that no matter our station in life, our place within the lodge, what apron we wear, we will at some point stare death firmly in the face. And in this way, we are also all equal. There is no privilege in the afterlife. It doesn't matter if you were a billionaire here, you're not a billionaire there. There is no moral system, no faith, no religion that I'm aware of where the material possessions pass into the afterlife. That has always been universal. We all go somewhere. The somewhere changes. The things we can take with us generally do not. And consequently, these two interpretations are rather interesting. One basically says when you're born, you have an equal opportunity to become great in something. The other says, remember, we're all equal in death. Really, they're saying the same thing. There's a sense of equality there. But what do we do with that? Well, let's look at another interpretation, one of judgment. There are those that we see in our everyday life as our superiors. Perhaps people who are superior in knowledge, talent, wisdom, beauty, whatever it happens to be. But there are also people who we feel superior to in one way or another. Maybe we're more responsible. Maybe we are more beautiful, whatever it happens to be. And see, that's a problem. The level suggests that we approach them all as equals. Not by knocking down the superior and raising up those we see as fools, but rather through the application of empathy. Recognizing that these two people are going through different things. We don't know their hardships. We don't know what they've been through. We don't know if this is, in fact, a world-class doctor that we just happen to see losing it at a self-checkout in the local Kroger. We don't know what that person has been through, and so why are we judging them? So we need to approach them as equals. Not by, again, knocking down the superior and raising those that we see as fools. Rather, we must mentally walk a mile in their shoes, understand their talents, their circumstances. It is on us to mentally equal the playing field. To do this, we must not hasten to judge. Rather, we are reminded to listen intently. The attentive ear, that jewel of masonry, really would teach us to listen to everyone, because even a fool will have a good point on certain issues. And so the idea is to regard everyone more or less as equal. Again, looking at the character rather than their material possessions. We're reminded to listen intently to words and to deeds. To do this is to step off the scales that we apply to our fellow man. We can absolutely use logic. Don't get me wrong. Some people just have some really poorly thought out ideas. It happens. So we can absolutely use logic to judge their ideas when we synthesize them with our own. But judging the idea and judging the man are two very different things. One is generally acceptable. Take a debate, for example. I can argue with someone about their point and say, no, you're wrong with this, and here's why. But you would never attack the person. You would never say, oh, but you don't understand this because you only have a 4th grade education. That would be seen as generally inappropriate, and that's exactly what we're getting at here. This eliminates prejudice and equals the scales of justice so we can better understand the people around us. More to the point is very similar to the Dunning-Kruger effect, which we dealt with a little while ago. So we run into this problem of overestimating superiority. If you overestimate someone's superiority over you, then you never really recognize your own ability. And if you underappreciate or underestimate their knowledge, their talents, their abilities, then we never recognize their own wisdom. So that's the equality that the level is looking for. It's looking for us to basically remove judgment. Very Buddhist idea. But remove judgment in our interactions with other people. Yes, there are societal judgments. For example, we judge that murderers should go to prison. And that's societal. But on an individual basis, judgment is more or less unnecessary in probably 90-95% of all your interactions. Yes, there will be times that you come across someone and you go, I judge that this is not a great person for me to spend a lot of time with or whatever else because they're not very healthy for me or whatever the circumstance is. And that does happen. But this is judging, just that continuous cycle of judgment that we tend to have for the people around us. In terms of practical application, the level demonstrates that we are descended from the same stock. We partake of the same nature and share the same hope. And though distinctions among men are necessary to preserve subordination, we've heard that line as well, yet no eminence of station should make us forget that we are brethren. For he who is placed on the lowest spoke of fortune's wheel may be entitled to our regard. They might know something we don't. They might have a talent that we need. Treat them with equality. We must recognize that we are all equal in birth and in death, that we all need to recognize that we are equal in life as well, that part in between. The recognition should change the way in which you live and treat others. It is intimately connected with the idea of justice, not in the sense of retribution for a wrong done, but in treating each other with that just due without distinction. Effectively, what it means is we are to love each other, to serve each other, to treat each other better than we deserve. Not just the person you like, not just the person you agree with, but everyone. It's very much the golden rule, which is another one of those sort of universal virtues we see everywhere. Treat your neighbor as you would like to be treated. So at the end of the day, if we're all equal in death and in birth, we must also be equal in life. And think about how much easier it would make your life if instead of being judged or judging others, you simply went with someone's character. You sought to see them as a deeper, fuller person. You didn't see them as one-dimensional, as that guy who made the poor decision about purchasing whatever it is, or dating the wrong person or whatever else. How much easier would your life be if you would eliminate those expectations, those judgments? Maybe expectations is going a little bit further, but you get the idea. We are all endued with the divine spark, with a soul, with that immortal part which survives the grave and bears the nearest affinity to that supreme intelligence which pervades and animates all nature, and which can never die. So why do we spend so much time judging others? And think about it. Think about a time where you judge someone and basically dismiss their concept, their idea, whatever the situation is, because you felt that they just couldn't possibly be adding to the conversation. It's happened to all of us. And that's the message here. At the end of the day, the level is about withholding judgment. Judge an idea. You can judge a talent. Is Jerry really a good bricklayer? That's fine. That can be judged. But it's also about understanding that just because Jerry's a bricklayer and Jim is a doctor doesn't mean Jim is somehow superior. As long as they have both developed their talents, they are the same and should be regarded as such, because everyone has their ideas. The lesson of equality, that in all respects, all men are the same and equal, but it is evident in many respects that men are very unequal. Things such as physique and talent and gifts and abilities and character. And we get that. We see that variation. The principle that we owe goodwill, charity, tolerance, and truthfulness equally to each and all. And that in our fraternity, all men travel the same road. The road of initiation, taking the same obligations, pay the same dues, and have the same rights and privileges. Imagine if we were to withhold judgment of a person. We would move past the cloud of any bias and find ourselves truly able to understand any idea, problem, or proposition, the universality of the globes. This is the kind of universal lesson we find in all cultures, and yet we see it uniquely present within the humble confines of the lodge. My brothers, as with all of these working tools, this does not mean that this is the only interpretation out there. The purpose is to get you to think about it, to consider it, maybe develop your own interpretation. But at least it gets the juices flowing. It gets people thinking about things. Thank you for joining me, Brother Chris Lidke, and the entire Further Light team on your quest to find more light through Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.